Noon, everyone. Can we try that again?
Go ahead.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. That's still. Don't need to hear it in stereo, I guess. Good afternoon. It's still. You know what? Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this special meeting of the Ad Hoc Committee on Comprehensive Job Creation Plan. Today's April 19th, 2016. I'm Paul Krikorian. I'm joined by my colleagues, Council Members Price and Blumenfield, and we're ready to begin. We'll take general public comment at the end of today's meeting. I'd like to now call item number 1. We've invited the city's major business organizations to come here today to have a discussion with us about some of the concepts that they may have about the work that this committee has done to date, and also other suggestions and policies that may help to cultivate an environment that promotes job creation and innovation. So I know that we have, let's see, Kevin Tamaki is here from VICA, and along with Alex Davis. Come on up. And sorry, I don't have my list here. Okay, thank you. If I could also ask Marie Rumsey of CCA and Ruben Gonzalez representing the LA Chamber. Good afternoon and welcome.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
So it's good to have you here. The floor is kind of yours. The idea is that we wanted to have an opportunity for dialogue to get a sense directly from all of you of some of the challenges that are within our control to help to fix in expanding the job creation potential here in the city. So whoever would like to start, take it away.
Well, good afternoon.
Kevin, you have home field advantage in this committee. So.
Yeah, absolutely, the 2/3. I really like that. Good afternoon, council members, Chairman Krikorian, Blumenfield, and Price. It's very nice to be here. I'm Kevin Tamaki. I'm chair of VICA, Valley Industry and Commerce Association. It's a membership organization of over 400 small to large businesses, including nonprofit organizations, and just want to thank the committee for allowing us to provide some input into this really compelling and we think very needed initiative, and that is one to help spur and enhance job creation in the city of Los Angeles. We were very pleased when the motion came out on the creation of these JEDI zones. We think that they're a very positive step, considering that there was sort of a vacuum with the demise of the Community Redevelopment Agency and a lot of the incentives and mechanisms that would allow for economic development, the attraction of new businesses, and job creation. It's a great first step, and it's pretty much. Speaking for VICA, it's really in our wheelhouse. We're about economic development, job creation, improving the business climate in the city of Los Angeles. And so we think that the city should really take a position that be as comprehensive as possible. Look at all the areas that are associated with the incentives, job creation, permitting. Look at inspection, look at things like taxation. Obviously something like the gross receipts tax is an issue that we've been working very hard at for a long time, and we'd like to see certain sectors of the economy, such as tech, which makes up a good chunk of the area that we represent. You know, we're on both sides of the hill, but in the San Fernando Valley there's quite a bit of new startups and technology, green technology. We have a great educational system there, so the pipeline is there for for people to join and to really be able to get into the good paying middle class jobs that we've had in the past. We want to really revive that. So let's not be afraid to be very comprehensive. And I think that technology, that something that we're all familiar with is the CityLink LA initiative. That also is a very good first step. So I just want to say that we really appreciate this committee and the council taking a look at ways to incentivize job creation and business from coming in, to come in. And it's great because our members, they do this every day. And so we feel that we can bring good stories to bear and real good data that will help get this initiative off and running. So I think sort of in the spirit of the Jedi Zone, may the workforce be with us on this.
Thank you.
Yes, as our chairman mentioned, we repeatedly hear from our members that the cost of labor in operating a business is the number one incentive and thing that they look at when they're considering expanding or leaving the city. So I echo the sentiments of our chairman and just want to reiterate that what it comes down to for our members and the businesses in Los Angeles is the cost of operating a business, and anything that the city can do to lower that and help expand employment opportunities and further growth within the businesses is much appreciated and needed at this point. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Marie Rumsey. I'm here on behalf of the Central City Association. Thank you for having us here today. We've been working with your staff and your office for some months on a comprehensive job plan, and we really thank you for bringing this together. You guys have done a great job trying to coalesce some new ideas around, economic development in the city. And so we were asked to think about, tools or incentives the city can utilize in the Jedi zones. So we played with that a little bit, and we did some brainstorming, and we tried to think of new things that the city maybe could bring to bear in these zones. One of the things was creating the city's own environmental leadership design program, similar to what the state does. It would be applied for projects of a certain size that meet certain job requirements, certain investment amounts. Those projects could be entitled to streamlined development review. They could be entitled to certain city incentives. We thought the city could do a lot of things around, subventions and property tax reductions for qualified industries, for clusters that the city wants to see grow. One of the things we talked about was establishing a capital investment tax fund. This could be a way to keep existing businesses here in the city and help them grow. As a company who's here buys new equipment, maybe let them take off some of their business tax fee for making that investment. As they expand, maybe let them reduce their property tax. Those were some of the things we, played with. Another thing we talked a lot about was the enhanced financing districts and setting specific goals for geographic areas and really using those as a financing mechanism. Those are tools the city has and that we should be using. We have a lot of other ideas around bids. We also have ideas around expanding the business team, making it more active, and then also implementing the full recommendations from the Matrix Development Services Reform Report. I'm happy to kind of share the mic and maybe revisit some of these things too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Why don't we do that, and then in particular, when we come back, if you could talk a little bit more about bids and the business team in particular.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Ruben Gonzalez. I'm happy to be here on behalf of the LA Area Chamber of Commerce. I echo the comments made here, and we've had a great working relationship with the staff in this committee, and obviously the chair, your leadership has been outstanding on this. Not just because I love the name Jedi, I just think that's really cool. What I would focus on and what I hear most from members are to some extent the easiest things that this council can do, because it's really a change in either policy perspective or structure as far as our elected leaders are concerned. When I first spoke to this committee at its opening session, I'm going to repeat what I said there. The number one change we would like to see from the chamber is that this committee not be ad hoc, that we have a business and jobs committee as part of the council structure permanently. And let me tell you why. I mean, I've been working in and around City Hall for 20 years, and we've seen a change in structure. Some people like it, some people don't, but really we act more like Sacramento does now. So most of the work is done in committee, where it used to be sometimes done on the floor in very, raucous ways. I used to work for Ruth Galanter, and back in those days with her and Nate Holden was entertaining, at least, if not productive. But now we have so much done in committee. But the problem is, whether you agree with it or not, whether it's perspective or reality, the reality to the business community is that we don't have a forum that looks from the perspective of what is good and healthy to keep businesses healthy. It seems in every other committee there's a focus on what is best for the employee and the worker, and how can we improve their quality of life, which is great, or how do we increase housing. And so there are advocates and committees focused on those areas across the council structure, but we don't have that. In Sacramento, if in one policy committee, it's going to be advocates for certain area of issues, they're going to push their issue, but that when it gets to rev and tax, or it gets to appropriations, or it gets to the business or small business committee or business practice committee, that you're going to have your chance, because that's the prism by which that committee is instructed to look at things. We don't have that here. We simply don't. And so we're kind of, a lot of times feel like we're screaming at the wind. And so we need that committee that's simply about balance, because in the end, most businesses, they don't have a political philosophy. They're not against the goals that the council or the city have. But they can't continue to be funding good ideas when there just isn't the margin in the business to do it. And so that's the discussion that doesn't really happen now, or it happens on the margins, but it's not the focus or the priority of those 3, 5, 7 council members. And that's something we need to see. The second thing that we would love to see is greater use of metrics. The city council just passed a cleanup, greenup initiative. It's supposed to be a pilot program in 3 areas of the city. What's a pilot program? You try something out, you test it, you measure it. If it's successful, then you spread it wide. If it's not successful, it goes away. 0 metrics in there, in that proposal. No metrics called for, period. That's a problem. We need to have on every policy metrics, because you can't manage what you don't measure, and you shouldn't keep regulations on the books that don't work, because then it just creates logistical problems, greater expense for business, which means fewer dollars going to create jobs, which is the goal of this committee. So we really need, it should be a structural requirement that any policy has some sort of metric to it that's real and quantitative. Going along with that, we would argue that there should be some sort of timeline by which every regulation the city council passes and the mayor signs sunsets. 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, whatever number we want to discuss and come to, and our council members and the mayor decide on, they should sunset, stop, be reviewed and looked at, and decide if they stay, they go, or they need to be tweaked to continue. Because right now, and you can even see it just in the procurement process, if you're trying to do an RFP with the city, you're talking about phone books. And a lot of the reason for that is when you do a regulation and it exists long enough, at some point it stops being an idea and it becomes a sacred cow. And we're all afraid to be the one to stand up and say, oh, we don't need to do that anymore, or another agency does it better. So I could go on with several other ideas, but I think I'll stop at those 3 or 4. But the main point is, I think there can be a conversation as part of what you're doing. That's, it's the last question that we were asked to kind of comment on. What frustrates the business community much? These are some of the things structurally that can be changed in how policy and regulation is considered through the process from soup to nuts, where we feel like we're actually partners at the table and not, again, screaming into the wind much of the time. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Members, anybody want to interject with questions at this point? Or?
Just a couple. First of all,
Yeah,
thanks for the
right.
perspectives. I really appreciate the unique role that the business community plays in pushing these issues forward. I'm, interested in the business improvement districts. We started one on Central Avenue. It's been very successful downtown. Theodore Bid, of course, has been a real pioneer. Can you give us some thoughts, your thoughts on the bids, and maybe some things they aren't doing that they could be doing here in our community, or any anecdotal information about successes other places that you think would be applicable here?
Sure.
to Marie.
I mean, I definitely have some ideas on ways that the city could partner with bids. I know one of the things that's really missing right now is a baseline services agreement between the bids and the city. I know in downtown, for the downtown center bid area, since it was established, there has not been a city sanitation truck that comes to downtown. So that's an issue. Bids are supposed to be extra services, not supplanting city services. So that baseline agreement is important. I think another big area for partnership for cooperation between bids and the city would be when a bid is applying for a permit, maybe to repair a sidewalk or to repair a street tree or to repair a banner, do some kind of expedited review and processing. I think that would work, and I think also on a similar note, when the city is doing an infrastructure project, reach out to the bids, let them know early, see if there's an opportunity for them to make the property owners aware, and then also if there's an opportunity to leverage that with one of their street improvement activities. You know, crosswalks are always a big thing, crosswalk enhancements that bids do, and maybe there could be greater collaboration there. A couple kind of smaller things, but still important, is the city used to provide graffiti removal paint along with rollers and gloves to bids for free in order to remove graffiti. The city also used to provide trash bags to bids. Those things no longer exist, but those would be great. I know the historic core bid in downtown, it's not a huge one. They spend $20,000 a year on trash bags. That would be a great help from the city. And I know one of the other things that's been talked about for a long time is waiving the dumping fees for bids when they drop off trash at city facilities, since they're helping clean up the streets. Those are just a few ideas that I've gotten from our bid partners.
Any other thoughts on bids? Mr. Bloomfield?
I mean, I like all the ideas that you guys are coming up with in terms of the bids. The dumping fees is a great idea, talking about the technology and trying to leverage that, CityLink and otherwise as well, and metrics. I'm a big believer in metrics and in all the policies that we have, and I guess, and if there's policies moving forward and you don't see enough metrics on it, let us know, because I think you'll find a sympathetic ear with all of us, or many of us certainly, on that idea. And I'm glad to be part of this committee where we're focusing on jobs and trying to figure out the different ways to enhance jobs, because at the end of the day, it's all, that's the driver for not only our economy, but obviously for all of our city services are only funded at the level that business is thriving. So.
I guess just to comment a little on that, one other reason that a set committee like this would be great is we tend to get touched in silos. So over here we have the minimum wage being increased and sick days being added, and over here we have linkage fees being talked about, and over here we have Quimby fees being tripled or quadrupled. And at some point there also needs to be a committee where the discussion is, okay, the center will not hold, and what is the right, how much can be absorbed, again quantitatively, really how much can be absorbed by different industries as you're doing this, and what's the give up. So we want 3 to 4 times of a Quimby fee to bring in more money for parks. Fantastic goal. Add those costs to that, and it's harder to make a unit more affordable. I mean, it's not philosophical. It's just a reality. And so again, we have the conversations in pieces in various areas, but if that one place to have that balance discussed.
At VICA, we have 9 policy committees, and which is analogous to the LA Area Chamber and Central City Association, and which administer various areas. So I can see as maybe a bit of a policy for our organization to take a look at what this committee does in terms of looking at a jobs creation plan, and kind of thread through each of those committees ideas that can come back to this committee and to the council. And so whether it has to be land use, I spoke before about planning issues, permitting, things like that, housing, all of those issues I think are relevant to what this committee does. So we're very willing to be able to provide that input as we go through our business as an organization.
Mr. Spindler, turn that off. What? Turn it off. Turn it off or put it down or leave. Thank you. Why? Because I said so. And that's my ruling. Turn it off or leave. You won't distract this committee from its business. If you want to sit in the corner and watch your cartoons or do whatever you're going to do it. You will not distract this committee. If I get distracted by you, even an iota, you're gone. Am I clear? All right. One of the questions that I had as well for all of you was the local preference program. We've had this now in place for a few years, and frankly, as pleased as I am that we have it, it hasn't had as many participants as I would like, or any of us would. And I'd like to know your thoughts, if you have some, on why that might be, and what we can do differently to either in shaping the policy or doing outreach to businesses to enable more participation. I have no pride of authorship. It's okay. Go right ahead. You can just go right ahead and explain.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that it's a great city program, but businesses don't know about it. And I think it's like a lot of things that the city does, businesses don't know about it. And I think, one of the things that Carol and I were talking about today is maybe making the business team more active, expanding the mayor's business team, enhancing that, and making it really an entity that can go out and tell businesses about the programs that the city has to offer. I think it's hard because most businesses can't come to City Hall in the middle of the day and come to hearings because they're busy doing their work. And I think anytime you have policies that greatly impact them, it's really hard to get them involved. And I think that's just kind of the nature of it. So maybe having a more dedicated team that could be that entity would be an important function. And I think there is probably some value with it being, either from the council or from the mayor. So when they're working with other departments and other city entities, that kind of legislative power follows it.
And if I could add, I'll say a word you don't say a lot in this building, but, outsource at least part of the effort. I mean, it seems to me you have a good product. Create a campaign around it, and a real thriving campaign. The same, you run political campaigns, people with developments run campaigns, do outreach, bring in experts who do that kind of, it's literally sales and education. Declare local preference month or local preference quarter and set 30 to 90 days and have someone who's an expert in this put together a plan that utilizes the elected officials in the city, their networks, their bully pulpit, social media, direct mail, phones. Even if you just hire somebody who actually could put together the lists of businesses and the contacts to do that as well. We do that for many programs in the city. I don't know why we wouldn't do it for this, to have an actual, straight out, full-fledged, supported and financed campaign run by experts. That, I would say, would be the quickest way to get that word out and get people signed up.
Okay. Anything else? All right. Well, thank you. I appreciate your spending the time to be here. And this is obviously going to be an ongoing dialogue of which you are all a part, but I appreciate having the opportunity to check in with you periodically, too. So thanks all very much. We're taking no action on that item, but and because we're taking no action on that, I'll just hear comment later. Item number 2. And this is an EWDD report and also CLA and CAO report relative to efforts to create a citywide economic development plan. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Dora Huerta with the Office of the Chief Legislative Analyst.
And Shafi Amir from the Office of the CAO.
The report before you responds to a motion by Huizar and Cedillo and a number of subsequent committee instructions directing our offices to report on the Economic and Workforce Development Department's efforts to create and implement a citywide economic development strategy. Specifically, the recommendations in the report include authorizing the General Manager of EWDD to prepare a request for proposals for the selection of a consultant, to prepare the strategy and report back to Council, and instruct EWDD to work with other departments to develop the scope of work for the RFP. By way of background, our offices were asked to review a few of EWDD's reports which included various work programs and departmental goals. Our offices now recommend that the goals be further considered in formulating a larger comprehensive strategy that would be formed with interdepartmental coordination and local stakeholder input. In the report, we note elements that should be considered in the strategy, including interdepartmental coordination, existing policies and plans, regional conditions, shared vision by various stakeholders, mayor and council initiatives, a citywide business incentive plan informed by a gap needs analysis, the resources needed to implement the strategy, as well as metrics or indicators that would be used to track the strategy's progress.
And on a note regarding the funding, which is noted in the report, the CIO's office has preliminary identified funding in the unappropriated balance in the current fiscal year, the Economic Development Initiative, which currently has a balance of $1.5 million. This was originally reappropriated from the previous fiscal year for economic development activities, including strategic planning. Our office, this item would be subject to review for reappropriation in the 15-16 year-end FSR. But the CAO anticipates identifying a funding source when EWDD reports back to the council with their draft RFP for the consultant for citywide economic development strategy and a contract funding estimate as well.
A funding source separate from that amount in the UB that might
We anticipate,
carried over.
we would anticipate that there would be funding available for strategic planning for economic development, and so we would identify, I couldn't, potentially general fund, but we don't have it. But this is available because we were asked to identify a funding source at this point.
All right. Members, Mr. Blumenfield.
The Economic Development Chapter of the General Plan was last updated in 1996, but I guess it's being updated now. At what point in the process will the consultant coordinate with planning to obtain their recommendations for revisions of the Economic Development Chapter and to ensure that the citywide Economic Development Plan aligns with planning's update of their chapter, as well as the regional economic development strategies, et cetera? How is that coordination going to work?
In our report, we make a recommendation that EWDD is, or we suggest that they are involved in the update right now. That's estimated to be completed in the next few years, and to remain involved in future updates and looking to update and work with the planning department to update the plan every 3 to 5 years.
Okay, it's just one of those things. Obviously, we don't want to reinvent the wheel twice. We want to make sure the wheel that we invent is similar to the wheel that we're inventing with our left hand and our right hand. So that's good. Similarly, the committee I chair, the IGTCT committee, is reviewing how we apply for grants and our overall grant funding plan, which, as you know, is part of our economic development strategy because there's literally billions of dollars out there in grants, federal grants especially, that can have a huge impact on our economic development. So how will we coordinate the efforts in terms of updating how we do grants along with the economic plan?
One of the recommendations in here is coordinating with other existing policies and plans. And one document in particular, the Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy, the CEDS, which is required to apply for EDA grants, for example. We're asking that in this new comprehensive strategy that we incorporate existing plans. So if we have a CEDS that we know needs to be updated in the future, that we're sure to align all of our policies and plans with our strategy. So it facilitates updates. We're aligned with other grant objectives.
And in preliminary conversations with the department, with EWDD, the consultant really does have to be someone who is well-versed in understanding grants because the department itself is primarily grant-funded, and then there's a lot of economic development activity for the city that is grant-funded as well. So that would definitely have to be incorporated into, it would have to be a consultant that can incorporate that into their study and as well as a citywide economic development policy. But I do know that, I want to speak for the department, but I do know that's an important aspect of this effort as they go forward.
Okay, so just to put a pin in that as well, is that keeping the left hand and the right hand on the same page, I'm mixing a lot of metaphors here, but on the same page, seeing as we're going through this extensive process with the IGTCT committee, that when we have this consultant, that they work closely with the committee on that element of the strategic plan, I think is important as well. So, thank you.
Mr.
express?
I know in this latest previous budget cycle, there was some real attention focused on the workforce centers. I see our general managers here from EWDD. But just curious to know how we can better align the workforce centers with our job creation strategies, how we really make them a focal point of identifying employment opportunities, training opportunities, how we funnel projects through that entity in a way that, provides some accountability and some results, or better results, I should say.
Well, as part of the interdepartmental coordination, of course, we'd be working with the various departments to lay out the roles and responsibilities and their involvement, because we recognize that a number of departments play a role in the economic development initiatives throughout the city. So coordinating the work that they do in the workforce centers and in other departments outside of EWDD would be key to the strategy.
I'm sorry. I was just going to add, regarding the workforce centers specifically, which are primarily implemented by EWDD and grant-funded, those would be a primary aspect, because what we would envision the consultant to do is to take the existing resources, the existing structures, and incorporate them into the City of Los Angeles' citywide economic development policy. And so the job creation aspect is grant-funded, and so they would have to definitely coordinate that.
When is the consultant going to be on board? I guess I missed that part. Are we doing an RFP for this consultant?
The current recommendations before you would recommend for approval for EWDD to draft their RFP, and then to come back to council with that draft for input. But if you had more specific questions regarding your point about the workforce centers, we might let the department talk about the connection.
Yeah, well, no, I'm just excited. I know we did some reorganizing of those centers. I think the number was
17.
17 now, in an effort to give them greater resources to be more effective. And just
They can engage in public-private partnerships, but they're federally funded and it's a restricted source, so they have to engage in activities that are in compliance with their funding. They are able to do P3s, public-private partnerships. We have 17 work source centers. We have 16 youth source centers. We have 9 funded business source centers, and many of them engage in partnerships now. That was part of the last procurement exercise, that they demonstrate that they have the capacity to build partnerships.
any evidence of that occurring yet?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And we are metrics-driven, not only as required by the federal government, but we produce monthly metrics on their level of success, their level of engagement, their level of new clients, their level of placements, and each one specializes in different things. The one that's on Jefferson near Exposition Park tends to specialize in construction. The one at CRCD, Trade Tech, specializes in culinary arts, green jobs. They have a hospital or healthcare cohort on campus heavily into veterans placement and placement of people who are formerly homeless, and it goes on and on and on. Each one has an emphasis.
How about the formerly incarcerated? Does that come out of
Yeah,
Trade Tech?
yes, reentry, absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. Many of them get additional streams of funding based on reentry alone, and they also have partnerships with reentry organizations. WLCAC is an example of that, a workforce center that does that. And we will be doing the RFP. We'll be drafting the RFP, working with the CAO and the CLA, but we will be doing the drafting and outlining the parameters and understanding that, there's a best case scenario and a worst case scenario. The worst case scenario is that we are confined to the funding sources that we have now. And to Councilmember Blumenfield's comment about grant funding, one thing that you might consider, because we've been discussing it, is we don't leave money on the table in this department. We have to understand the nature of the money and the amount of administrative impact it has in terms of our overall budget. And it may be after we have this discussion and vetting that perhaps we can come up with a proposal to give back to our congressional representatives so that they can be made aware and possibly come up with a legislative response to the need we have here at the city level, so that we can get out there and solicit and take more grant money and be able to implement it, but be able to afford it over the long term, so that it's worthwhile to compete for it. Everybody loves money. You just have to be able to pay for it.
And of course, the more refined those metrics are,
Yes.
and the better able we are to demonstrate success in each of those metrics, the better able
Yeah,
we are to
we
be
have,
competitive.
on the work source side, we have extremely good metrics because it is demanded of us by the federal government. On the economic development side is, again, you are well aware that we're continuing to build capacity and seek resources. We are keeping metrics as we go along, but we're still in an upward trajectory on the economic development side. But on the work source side, the metrics, and on the Jobs LA side, jobsla.org, and on the mobile app, we have weekly metrics. So whatever type of metric you're interested in, we can, keep pouring it on.
Okay, very good. Anything else, members? All right, thank you all. Before we vote on the recommendations, I'd like to invite Ms. McAllister up on item number 2, please, and Mr. Spindler on number 2.
Okay, so this is the citywide economic plan development. Item number 2, I'm Patricia McAllister. I think, and I always go back to this, it doesn't matter what we do, even housing. When you create jobs, I'm looking at illegal aliens. They're the ones getting the jobs. And I see that Los Angeles is really far behind in a lot of things. Everything on this agenda, especially contract procurement, I'll get to that later. And I think that the people of Los Angeles are very intelligent, and the council people and whatnot, but the people you're hiring, unfortunately, were not born here. Many of them don't speak English well, and they don't understand English well, and I see a lot of incompetency. Some things you should be doing and knowing as a city, I don't see it going on. And I'll get into some of that later. Again, we need some provisions where illegals cannot get these jobs. Until we do that, you're wasting your time, my time, and everybody else's time. The reason you don't have an economic development plan for jobs is because the illegals have the jobs. What are you going to do, fire them? That's why people are on the street, living with their families, and their cousins and relatives and moms and dads. We don't see half of the people. They're living with relatives. Thank God for that. So we need provisions. If we don't address this immigration problem, this nation is going down the drain. And California is too big, and I'll get into some of the things I see you're doing that you're not doing. You're one of the largest states in the nation, and you're 50 years behind because you have all of these illegals. Even the mayor's got an illegal child sitting in front of his office. All these illegal relatives in here, if your mom and daddy are illegal, you're illegal. Simple as that. And many of them don't speak and understand English because their parents don't speak and understand it. So they didn't grow up in that environment speaking and understanding English.
Mr. Spindler?
Yes, very good comments by Ms. McAllister. How do you have an economic development plan? Well, you have to have people running the show that give a shit. Herb Wesson Jr. doesn't give a shit. He's not here. He's council president. Doesn't give a shit. Herb Mitchell Englander's running for another office. He doesn't give a shit. So we get a bare minimum quorum of 3 people. This is an ad hoc committee. It's supposed to be urgent. It's supposed to be an emergency. That's what an ad hoc is for. There's no emergency. Nobody here gives a fuck. Nobody here cares. So you go to CD3, you got building inspectors running out to people's houses and charging them $371 because the building inspector asked for permission to come into your backyard and look at something. And then they send you a bill. Oh, we found a violation. You have to pay $371. I go to the councilman and I can't get it fucking waived. And then my neighbor gets the same thing and she can't get it waived. So we had to economically develop building 2 walls when one could have been repaired.
Yeah,
Mr. Spindler, I'm sorry, has nothing.
It does. It's an
Really
example.
Bring it back.
It's an example of what your economic development is. Your economic development in the city is corruption. It's pathetic. It's apathy. And then you have these staffers within each council district running rogue.
Okay.
They're running fucking rogue.
Not on the topic.
And it is on the topic because you know that governance of the city is the reason we're in the shitter on jobs. Because we have nobody in this city running this place that knows a fucking thing about creating jobs. This city has not created a real job in 20 years. LATimes.com.
All right. Members, the recommendation is to adopt CLA recommendations number 1 and 2 on item number 2. If there's no objection, that will be the action of the committee. Thank you. That brings us to item number 3. City Administrative Officer to report with assistance from the Department of General Services, BCA, ITA, and the Mayor's Operations Innovation Team relative to the development of a comprehensive plan to streamline and improve the city's procurement and contracting practices. Welcome.
Jody, thank you. Jody Oxheimer with the CAO. Oh, good. I was about to feel a little lonely up here. So you have before you a report from the CAO that responds to the council instruction as outlined on the agenda, asking General Services, ConAd, ITA, other relevant departments to work with the Mayor's Operations Innovation Team on the development of a comprehensive plan. You've heard a lot about the complexities of the city's contracting process, and the magnitude of that request is pretty huge. So we focused primarily in 3 areas. Part of the instruction was to provide specific actionable recommendations. So the 3 areas that we focused on were a training program for department contract coordinators, technology tools, and data and analytics. So training has the potentially immediate benefit of allowing trained staff to provide better and faster contract administration and enforcement. So would hopefully result in faster contract processing. So we've recommended that contract administration, Department of Personnel, General Services, CAO, and the city attorney work together to develop a training curriculum that includes information on types of contracts that are awarded, competitive bidding and selection process, business registration, administration, review of contracts for compliance with contract requirements, policies, and procedures, with the goal of developing and offering a professional certification program that would be voluntary for employees who would choose to pursue a career in contract administration. The personnel department currently has an online training academy, and we would expect that the training would be available through the online training academy, and that the Bureau of Contract Administration would take the lead in developing the content. The controller has asked to be part of that effort, so we would recommend that the recommendation be amended to include the controller as part of that effort. For technology, the city's continuing. Sorry.
Before you move off of that, can
Yes.
you just define what would you envision to be the advantages in terms of job creation and doing business in the city to have an expanded training program?
So currently, each department has a department contract coordinator. Often, it's a responsibility that's added on to some other job responsibility. So staff will be responsible for maybe drafting an RFP, maybe drafting contract language, maybe negotiating the contract, making sure that the contractor or potential contractors complies with the myriad of city administrative requirements, but doesn't necessarily have the tools or have the ability to make that work a priority. So absolutely not in all cases, but in some cases it becomes kind of an ad hoc effort. And it would appear that in order for that to be faster and more informed and ultimately more effective, those staff would benefit from having access to training that's developed by all of the agencies that touch contracts at some point in time, that we end up with a better contract product, but also end up with that product happening faster. So the vendor benefits from not waiting. We didn't, the mayor's office has talked about the length of time, the 400 and some days for a contract to be executed. We didn't break that down. But there are a lot of places and a lot of entities that touch that contract, and any way in which that time can be abbreviated from what it is now ultimately helps businesses, I would hope.
Great.
Okay. So technology.
Yeah, if I could just add
Oh,
one thing.
please.
Additionally, we found that a lot of the reporting that happens is done on what the individual DCC or department thinks is best from their perspective. So then when the city goes to look at those reports or make informed decisions based on this data, the data is not as strong as it could be. So are we allocating resources effectively in a way that improves, that positions the city to create better jobs down the road? It's hard to argue yes or no because of the way reporting is done after contracts are awarded. So through proper training, we can get DCCs in a position where they're reporting cohesively and they're feeding us information that can then allow you all to make the policy decisions that position the city to really create amazing jobs and position LA to be, the best that it can be. So it's
Okay,
both
what
of
he
the-
said.
All right, sorry to interrupt your train of thought.
No.
Technology part.
Okay, so then for technology, technology can offer a lot of benefits, right? It can improve communication, it can expedite processes, it can broaden competition. So the city's been continuing to make improvements to the business assistance virtual network and is preparing to beta test a business portal, get feedback to see how it's working. Even with the business portal, there are several processes that will still be done manually. And ITA prepared a contract gaps chart, which is attachment 3 to the report. It looks like this. So you can see that we still have room for improvement. The business portal is a great first step, but more is needed. The question then is, what's the best right way to proceed? So we recommend that, again, ITA act as project manager, but with assistance from General Services, Contract Administration, City Attorney. The controller has again asked to be included as a participant in what that system looks like, particularly since at some point it will likely connect with the city's financial management system, that we put those requirements together. Now, ITA did identify a need for a consultant in the range of $200,000 to $300,000 to help with that requirements analysis and potentially the development of an RFP for a system depending on what the best path looks like. We're not recommending that funding. If the council wants to move forward on that, that would be something that would need to be addressed.
Mr. Chris, Chairman. So talk a little bit about this business portal. What's going to be beta tested exactly?
So I'm going to...
It's not happening now.
Right, so I'm going to have to defer to ITA or the mayor's office to discuss that more specifically. I know just a little enough to probably say the wrong thing. So, any takers?
I'm happy to speak to that a little bit. It's really looking at how easy is the experience both on the back end when DCCs or departments are feeding information into it, whether it's an RFP, an RFQ, or awarding a bid, and then on the other end, when a vendor goes to make moves on that opportunity, how easy, how fast, how accessible, how many times are you going to want to walk away from it before completing? Those are all things that should be accounted for, and that's kind of what the beta testing means.
When is that going to start?
Well, so soon.
That's comforting.
All right. Go ahead.
So any other questions on
Technology.
the idea would be to
Okay,
make the experience as seamless as possible.
Mr. Bloomfield.
Yeah, on the technology, you were saying there was a recommendation for a consultant to be hired to scope out the different functions in the contract management system, but you're not making that recommendation to go ahead and fund that.
Correct.
Is that because financial reasons, or you don't think that that consultant is necessary, or you don't think that that function is necessary?
No, I think primarily for financial reasons, that it was a function of identifying the funds to do that at this time.
Is it a priority to have that function happen? Because I get,
Yeah.
it's difficult to see in the report. It's contradictory in the sense of, here's an important function that we need. It's going to cost this amount, but we're not going to recommend doing it. And I'm having trouble reconciling that.
Yeah, so we think it's a really good idea for the departments to get together and develop the needs and requirements analysis. ITA, as our technical expert, believes that a consultant is important to do that. CAO is not prepared to recommend that funding at this time. So, yes, it's an important effort, and yes, we should have a solid requirements analysis before we begin to seek a system that meets our needs. We want to, the better our front end planning is, as you know, the better the product will be at the back end.
So is the belief that it could be done in-house and not through a consultant?
Well, the initial requirement study, I think ITA believes that they need a consultant. I just don't believe we're in a position to make the recommendation for the funding.
Okay. I could see why I might be confused by that.
Yes.
Well, just to clear that confusion up a little bit, maybe since we're about to enter budget hearings, it might be something that ITA would want to suggest as part of its ask in budget.
Yeah, timing is just a little tricky with today being April 19th and tomorrow being April 20th.
Understood,
Yeah.
Right.
understood.
Right.
But there's a second bite at the apple.
Yes.
So,
Okay.
Sorry.
Appreciate it.
which is not prejudging anything, just for the sake of full disclosure, but it helps to move the
Sorry to be
discussion
oblique.
forward.
Yeah.
So, okay.
And in the interest of full disclosure, I think probably several of the departments who are involved would hope for the opportunity to ask for additional resources as part of this effort, but we're not recommending that either as part of this report. So then finally, for data and analytics tools, I think you've heard a lot today about the importance of data and metrics, particularly in contracting. So we would like to highlight the importance of collection and reporting of procurement data across all city departments really being an integral piece of the city's procurement practices. We really should be standardizing our procurement data so that we can really facilitate comparison of contracting terms and conditions and eventually get better pricing. At the end of the day, the city could benefit greatly from leveraging this information and applying it to our procurement effort. But we also need to know what that's going to look like. So we're recommending as a first step that that Public Works, that the Bureau of Contract Administration with the Mayor's Operations Innovation Team research data collection methodologies and then provide a recommendation on what standardized data collection would look like. And the application and perhaps even beginning of the baseline data so we have something against which to compare future performance. Okay. We were asked to look at how to expedite payments to businesses, but without knowing exactly what the nature of any payment delays is, it's difficult to know quite what the right recommendation is. So what we have recommended is that the controller identify and assess any recurring trends or systemic problems that may impact timely contract payments. The controller has indicated that they've been working with the Office of Finance on upgrading the accounts payable module of the financial management system, and they've asked that finance be added to that recommendation as well as part of that partnership. And then finally, the settlement agreement that was adopted by the council as part of the a coalition agreement, had a letter of agreement that had a number of provisions and requested some further reports and studies. So we would recommend that ConAd and engineering, CAO, and the personnel department, with the assistance of the controller and the city attorney, report on efforts made to comply with the terms of the letter of agreement. Final note.
Yeah.
We don't have a recommendation about this, but we do mention or highlight the it's not a proposal necessarily, but the mayor's office has broached the idea, the operations innovation team has broached the idea of a consolidated procurement office. There's a lot of policy debate that needs to take place. Definitely requires further discussion, including feasibility, scope, expectations, and resources. And so we expect that that discussion will be taking place. And even though we don't recommend, there could make a recommendation about this, it could be brought back. So we do recommend that all of these items come back to the committee in 4 months with an update on either, well, an update on the status, but hopefully also in some cases the conclusion of the effort.
Great. Okay. Members, anything else? Just one other point on procurement. I think a lot of the frustration that smaller businesses in particular have is that we do have a very complex and challenging, cumbersome process to get through, and which, you know, that may be justified in creating a, you know, robust competitive bidding process when you have a $10 million contract, but when you have a $50,000 contract, people just don't want to deal with it, and the result is that we don't get competition for those sorts of contracts. So I'd like to ask that GSD and BCA, CAO, and the city attorney also develop some policy options that we might consider for a streamlined process that would still be consistent with competitive bidding requirements, but in a significantly streamlined way, so that for smaller contracts, we don't need to hire an army of lawyers and lobbyists and advisors to try to figure out how to get through the city's processes. So if you could come back when we bring these other matters back.
4 months?
Well,
maybe.
Yeah, I think I'm hopeful we will have concluded within 4 months. So, let's just say now that request is out there. We'll figure out when to bring it back, and you can work with my staff in figuring out what would be the best vehicle to bring that back. So, members, other questions?
Let's just sort of comment on, like the centralized procurement office, trying to figure out what, with the recommendations, also the metrics for what is a success on these kinds of models. Like once we do create it, how do we actually measure that we're achieving the objectives that we set out to do?
Well, exactly, and I don't want to leave the committee with the impression that this is all. I mean, this is really very, very initial steps, and there's still a lot more work to be done, the magnitude of which is really significant. And so the microphone's about to move left.
Yeah. This is Mark Thomas from the mayor's office. One of the reasons is one of the conclusions that we're strongly looking at. When you actually look at best practices, we're, if not the only major city in the country without a person in charge of procurement. And you can look and say our 432-day process compared to 3 to 6 months in comparable cities may be directly correlated with not having someone actually making sure it works, versus helping vendors and departments facilitate a very intricate business system. And so it's something I think we definitely should be exploring. And there have been calls for the last 20 years to create a centralized office, including from the council about 10 years ago. So it's not a new recommendation, it's just one that we actually want to really think about.
Melissa Ucla, General Services Department, and to reiterate Mark's sentiment, the centralized portion through the purchasing agent, our General Manager of General Services Department, has proven to show that through a streamlined, centralized process through commodity contracts, we have shortened the contract processing time for purchasing agent contracts in comparison to the service contracts that do take the 432 days to process. So overall, should we go down the path of looking at a centralized model, the hope is, and again with requests that have been submitted through the budget process for additional resources, to test a portion of centralized service contracts and see what improvements can be made upon centralizing a portion of services contracts through the purchasing agent.
If I can just add, Juan Vasquez with the Operations Innovation Team, I think it's important to understand that the training, the technology, and the data work in unison. Largely, when you implement a new tool, you need to train the staff on how to properly use it and how data goes into it, into other systems, and how that will look like a year or so from now, which is why having somebody or an office or a team or a group looking at it cohesively and in unison is really of the most importance. So understand those three areas. They're not silos, and they should not be silos. They should be interconnected.
Well said. Anything else, members? Okay, thank you all very much. Ms. McAllister and Mr. Spindler, keeping in mind 5 minutes overall, but come on up and take up to 2 minutes on this item if you'd like.
Okay, so I'd like to start with this last one, the procurement process. I'm from Chicago, and I think we have the best procurement process in the nation. I'm online here, and I'm just impressed. I haven't been there in a few years, but they really have updated it. And I'd like for your staff and the people in this meeting to go to Chicago Procurement Services, okay? City of Chicago procurementservices.com. I mean, it is really advanced. They have links for the available contracts that are out there. Then you hit this other link, the buying plan for 2016, 2017. All the MBEs, WBEs, and DBE firms are there. I used to have a WBE firm. I was listed. All the current opportunities are there. I just went in there and looked at some of the bids. Furniture repairing. They need somebody for business, make business uniforms, window washing, and a lot of construction. It's all right here. You guys, I've been coming to this meeting. You don't even know who the minority firms are. That's what you said, at least. I thought you said 4 minutes.
No, I said 2 minutes on this item.
Oh, okay.
but I just wanted to let you know 5 minutes overall.
Oh, okay. And you don't even, well, they claim they don't know who the minority businesses are and how much contracts they got. I think this is being done purposely. I think there's fraud and embezzlement going on. You guys know better than this. I mean, I'm a computer scientist, and to not have a database of your MBEs and WBEs and the contracts they get, I just think there's a lot of stealing going on, and you're going to get caught eventually. You're going to get caught, but that's where the stealing happens. It always happens under procurement, under contracts. That's why it's such a mystery here. And I think that you're behind in technology, like I said, because you're doing a lot of stealing. And that's how you steal. You fix the books and you hide stuff and things like that. But I'm going to try to get the White House in here because this city is going to pot. We can't even drive down the roads. Nothing's being fixed. You're stealing like I don't know what.
So, what is this about? It's about buying shit. Just got to go out and buy shit that you need. 435 days to buy some pencils and erasers and procurement? I mean, that's worse than the Department of Defense ever was. Something's wrong. So what can we do to change it? Privatize it. Hire an outsourced firm, tell them what you need, they'll go out, they'll buy what you want, then deliver it to you. Save 75%. Now that means you got to shut down Kevin James's Board of Public Works and fire those 5 fucking misfits downstairs. You won't need them. But you don't want to do that. You like corruption. You like stealing. You got to do it the corrupt way, just like the prior speaker. Too bad.
All right, members, the recommendation is to approve CAO's recommendations 1 through 5 in the report. If there's no objection, That will be the action of the committee. And that brings us to our final item, item number 4, CLA report in response to a motion by Wesson and Price relative to the current regulatory code as it pertains to business development, recruitment, and retention in the city and related matters. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Steve Liu with the Office of the CLA. The report presented before you today is in response to motion Westland Price and will begin to respond to the portion of the motion that addresses the review of regulatory codes. In order to begin to address this motion, our office found it useful to study the regulatory environments of other municipalities in order to get a sense of where the City of Los Angeles ranks relative to other cities. As a result, this report highlights key findings from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation's Regulatory Climate Index from 2014. The Regulatory Climate Index assesses 5 areas of business regulation and the impacts that they typically have on small businesses within 10 cities. For the purposes of this report, 5 cities were chosen: Dallas, Raleigh, Los Angeles, San Francisco, and New York City. Although each of these cities are distinct within their own regards in terms of population, per capita income, number of businesses, and geography, they were sampled from the Regulatory Climate Index to represent a wide range of economic and demographic backgrounds of small and large cities across the nation. Of the 5 cities sampled for our report, the City of Los Angeles ranks lower than Raleigh and Dallas and higher than San Francisco and New York City. The index assesses a city by first calculating a score for each area of business regulation based upon the simple average of 3 factors that measure regulatory burden: the number of procedures, the time to comply with a requirement, and the costs and fees associated with that requirement. Following this, the simple average of all 5 areas of business regulation are calculated for each city, resulting in a city's average score and ranking relative to the 9 other cities. As outlined by the index, the 5 areas of business regulation are as follows. The first area of business regulation that the study considers is the category of starting a business. Now, when we're talking about starting a business, we're talking about reserving company names, incorporating a company, registration to the state as an employer, and the attainment of licenses and other regulations per each state. The second category of business regulation is the processing of construction permits. The processing of construction permits includes the attainment of appropriate permits to build small commercial buildings, such as a plumbing permit, electrical permit, or a building permit, zoning environmental reviews, and compliance with other regulations per local or state regulations. The third area of regulation for businesses is the registration of property. This aspect of business regulation mainly applies to businesses that undergo commercial building transactions and, if applicable, includes payments of real estate transfer taxes and real property taxes. The fourth area of business regulation is the payment of taxes, and this speaks for itself as it includes payments of such taxes as sales taxes, employment taxes, corporate taxes, income taxes for several municipalities. And the last area of business regulation is the enforcement of contracts. The enforcement of contracts is dependent on the local court system, and it provides assurances and protections on business agreements between parties. Taking these scoring indices into account, out of the 10 cities that were evaluated in the Regulatory Climate Index, the City of Los Angeles ranks as follows during the year of 2014. The overall ranking of the City of Los Angeles is 8th, which is higher than San Francisco and New York City. The ranking for the City of Los Angeles for the individual area of business regulation of starting a business is 1st, where we are tied with the City of San Francisco.
Wait. First meaning we're the easiest to start a business in? Or what's that number? What does that mean exactly?
First in terms of being the easiest in the year of 2014 for registering a business. We have the lowest cost for registration per the study, according to the study, and the lowest waiting time, which is about 5 days.
Is registering business a city function or a state function or both?
I believe it is a state function, but I can get back to you on that.
So in that case,
state and the city function. Sorry.
It's both. I mean, it's most of the business licensing happens at the state level, but I guess we do have our business permit. I don't know how that breaks down. If we're tied with San Francisco, is that because all of California has a relatively easy state process, or is there anything unique about LA versus the other cities?
I believe it's mainly because it is a state process, which is why we're tied with San Francisco. But I think, which is why we're tied with San Francisco in terms of days and the cost of the payments. So yeah, I do think it's a state, but I can clarify that for you at a later time, with your office at a later time. The next ranking that we have is for the processing of construction permits, where we rank 7th. For the ranking of the registration of property, we rank 7th as well. And for the payment of taxes, we rank 10th, which is the last ranking. And the last area of business regulation that we looked at was the enforcement of contracts, where we rank 8th. It should be noted that these rankings were based on the regulatory climate in the year of 2014, and that these rankings and the respective regulations may have changed. We utilize this index for our report because we found it to be a good indicator that takes into account the life cycle of a small business that they typically experience, and it provides a useful snapshot for comparison with the city of Los Angeles relative to other municipalities nationwide. As this is an initial study in the review of regulatory codes, our final report will take into account this index and other studies, as well as updates to information as they become available.
Yeah, Mr. Bloomfield.
On the payment of taxes issue, is that specifically a percent, how much does this business pay in taxes, or does it have to do with the ease of paying those taxes? Or is it a straight dollar figure or a poll or perception figure?
So with regards to the study, it takes into account for the payment of taxes both the number of payments a business has to make and the amount of taxes they have to pay per percentage.
So it's a mathematical formula. It's not. There's no perceived issue involved in it. What people think of it or anything.
To the best of my knowledge, this study did not take this into account.
Great.
Mr. Price? This is interesting. I always love comparing with other cities to see how we rank and what we can learn from others' practices. A number of these categories, as Mr. Bloomfield just alluded, are city. Some of these categories of comparison are entirely city functions. Some of them are a blend of city and state functions, and possibly county as well. And some are entirely state functions, like enforcing contracts. As far as I understand about this report, that's really the time it takes to litigate a matter, the time and expense it takes to litigate a matter to enforce one's contract. The city has zero role in that. That's entirely a function of the delay in the courts. Conversely, when it comes to construction permits, we have a significant role in that, but that's also impacted by the state law, CEQA, and otherwise. So I think there's a lot in here that we can glean useful information from, but I think it's also helpful to lay out that there are some things that are just going to be out of our control, and we'll have to talk to our friends at other levels of government to try to get any relief in some of those areas. Yeah, Mr. Bloomfield.
Yeah. Were there particular things that other municipalities were doing in terms of the ones that are scoring favorably? The folks who are getting number 1 and number 2, things that we should be emulating that came out of this study?
So the study specifically highlights, for instance, in the area of dealing with construction permits, the cities of Dallas and Raleigh do have expedited processes for how they hand out their permits and how they do their zoning reviews. Unfortunately, for this report, we didn't delve into the detail of what they did specifically, but we could do it in a future report.
Because that to me is an important piece of the follow-up is to, there's no plagiarism in good government service. If somebody's doing something right, let's figure out who's doing it, how they're doing it, and let's steal that idea and be upfront about it.
And I think, to be clear, one of the values of this is that issue spotting, identifying where we should follow up with further information. I'm sure Mr. West and Mr. Price will, want to follow up with those. But for today's purposes, any further questions on this report? If not, before we receive and file it, we have cards for Ms. McAllister and Mr. Spindler. Ms. McAllister, you have 1 minute left. Mr. Spindler, you have 2 minutes left, and then we'll do general public comment. Oh, and by the way, you're both free to use your remaining time also to speak about item number 1 as well, which was a simple report, but we didn't take action on it.
Okay, the gentleman just said.
1 and 4.
Okay, he said the permits that you rank like number 1. Permit means nothing if it takes a year and a half to get the contract. executed. And I'm looking at your flow chart from today. It takes a year and a half. Did you look at the flow chart? I'm a computer programmer, so I know about flow charts. It takes a year and a half to get it executed. What the good does a permit mean? That means nothing. A year and a half in Chicago, it may take a month or two. That's why the city, the streets look so bad. You guys need to get on the case. Now, from what I'm a teacher and an intuitive introvert. From what I see, you guys are not used to working. That's what it is. You just hear yawning and whatnot. You're going to work for this money, and you're going to learn your job. You don't know your job. These people here are teaching you, and they're teaching you lies, a lot of them. So what he's saying is not true. A permit. What's a darn permit, and you can't get out there for a year and a half and start fixing stuff? You're going to do your job and get educated and stay out of these bars and drinking and all that little crazy crap.
Thank you. Mr. Spindler, 2 minutes.
The latest forecast.
He has 2 minutes, and you can allocate that between item 1 and this item if you'd like.
Yes. Latest forecast released from UCLA's Anderson School of Management. Los Angeles still has a long way to go, says William Yu, an economist at UCLA who worked on the study. There's nothing to celebrate about. The study finds that more people were employed all the way back in 1990 than they are now, even though almost 500,000 more people live here. That's the story. That's the problem. 1990, we're below 26-year levels in jobs, but have 500,000 more people here. What are they doing here? They're not working. It's like the LAPD arrests people on Venice Boardwalk for working. They arrested me last year for trying to hand a speaker card in. They pulled people over going to work. When people do work, you stop them from working. That's your business model. There it is at UCLA. That's why you don't like UCLA so much, because they write things like this. They're trying to tell you something at UCLA Economic School. You people have a fucking management problem, and it comes from the top. Where's Herb Wesson? Where's Mitchell Englander? Okay, they're nowhere. They're out drinking right now at the nearest bar. 2 fucking drunks. And we cannot have this kind of leadership. We need people that care. People that don't play with phones while they're in public meetings. People that pay attention and really want to fix the problem. But you don't want to fix the problem because you profit from misery. Poverty pimps plus corruption equals the report by UCLA. It's fucked up here.
All right. We'll go ahead without objection, members, to receive and file item number 4. That brings us to general public comment. Ms. McAllister, Mr. Spindler, 1 minute each. Everyone else is free to leave if you'd like.
I'm getting ready to speak. Yeah. Well, I got 500,000. I have millions listening to me online. I do advertise these good meetings. I do advertise these important meetings. Well, as I said, I'm an intuitive introvert and a teacher, and I've had years of observing students, and I see you all as students, and what I see is incompetence and fear. A lot of you are afraid. You don't want to do the work. You're not used to working hard. That's what I see in California, not just from you, but mainly Californians. You have this nice weather and you're laid back, but the state is going to pot, and you're going to have to do your job. Don't be afraid of these department heads. Get them in here. If they're not doing their jobs, we have to get rid of them. A lot of them are just trying to hold down their jobs, and a lot of them are not telling you the truth. You need to have someone fact check what they're telling you. And I keep saying this is a legal problem, but I can't wait till Donald Trump gets into office. I want to be one of the people in line helping deport them. You understand? If I have to become a security officer, we're going to get them out of this nation. I talked to one the other day. She speaks no English, barely. And I said, well, you want to take a course? She said, why should I? Okay, that's how bold they are. They don't even want to speak our language. Now, how can you put them in position? And the ones who do speak, they don't understand our language.
So from UCLA's Economics School, they say Mayor Eric Garcetti's proposal to raise minimum wage to $13.25 an hour by 2017 would hurt job growth. Says the effect could be more dramatic than the $15 wage going into effect in Seattle and that $15 rate that's on a November ballot in San Francisco. Well, you see it happened. This is from September 2014. So you took exactly what the experts told you not to do and did it. And that's what happens. That's what happens when you play with little tablets and little phones and don't listen to people when they're telling you shit like this. My tablet's not a game fucking pad. I read and I gain knowledge. And that's why I know, don't open a business in this city.
All right, there being no other business before the committee, we're adjourned.